Hopefully they'll have a video here shortly morning of her. But when McKenna was 2 years old, we started noticing that she had a pain underneath her arm. And when we would pick her up out of her car seat, she would always complain, Daddy, that hurts. You pinch me. And I remember my wife, Kristen, don't squeeze so hard, be nice. And we went through that for a little over a week. And McKenna was in the bathtub. Krista was giving her a bath. And she reached up to grab something. And when she reached up, Krista noticed that it didn't look right. So, thank you. So we took her out on the living room floor, had her lay down, and we put her arms over her head. And we could notice that there was one side that had a lump to it. It didn't look like the other side. So we went into the doctor, and I remember the doctor saying, it's just an infection. It's, we'll give her some antibiotics. We'll take care of this. And we went through that for a few days, and the antibiotics didn't work at all. It actually made it worse. She spiked some fevers, and she was getting sick. And we decided that it was time to go in and to take some tissue and find out what was going on. I remember the day I was at work, and we got the results back. And my wife called me, and we found out that my daughter McKenna had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And that was the start for us. We were immediately taken down to Children's Hospital in St. Paul, and we went through chemo. And we did about 1.5 years of chemotherapy on my daughter. And she did great. She was 2 years old. She just thought that was normal. This is what I do. I take chemo, I get sick, I throw up, and I have some shaved ice. She as this champion of a little girl, plowed through this chemo. And we were so excited when it was done. I still to this day remember the day that we went in, and the doctor said, okay, now we just have time. Now let's see what happens. 2 months later, underneath her other arm, we discovered another lump, a cluster of lumps that was underneath her arm. We went back in, and again took some tissue samples, and once again we found out my daughter for the second time now had cancer. At that point in time, you take a step up. You have to go through some radiation, and then you go through a bone marrow transplant, which we did. And her sister, Jaden, her little sister Jaden, was a perfect match for us, which in the blood cancer world, that's like hitting the lottery. And she matched in all the categories, and we went through a bone marrow transplant with McKenna at the University of Minnesota. And again, she was such a champion. We had a couple of minor setbacks, a couple of infections that we were day to day, hour to hour on a couple of occasions. And again, my daughter McKenna went through everything. This is normal. This is how I do it. And we finished and completed the bone marrow transplant. We celebrated 5 years and 2 months of being cancer-free. And because of an organization like TNT, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, my wife and I were able to have those 5 years, 2 months with our daughter. And in that time, I got to see a little girl start maturing into a teenager and started to see the characteristics of her, of the young adult that was maturing in front of us. But at 5 years and 2 months, her cancer came back a third time. And we went through another bone marrow transplant down at the University of Minnesota. And again, we used Jaden as her donor. The third time wasn't as easy. We didn't have McKenna knew what was going on. McKenna was older, wiser, understood what was and what this disease. She understood what the word cancer meant. At the first couple of times, she was so little, she was so young. But now she knew. She started asking us questions, if I die, I want to be buried next to my Uncle Brony. And of course, let's not talk about that. We're going to focus on getting you through this bone marrow transplant, and everything's going to be fine. So we went through the transplant, and again, it was fairly simple for us to get through the transplant. McKenna came home, and about 3 weeks after she was home, she had difficulty breathing. And we took her back down to the university and figured out that she had an infection in the lungs. And on McKenna's birthday, we were forced to put her on a ventilator. She couldn't breathe. And to this day, I still remember, telling her that we love you, we'll take care of you, and I'll see you when you wake up. McKenna was on the ventilator, and it never got, as you learn from the doctors, and you look back now, and you could see these things, and you're like, these steps in the path, and you say, okay, something was wrong there, but I was trying to be her savior, I was trying to be her father. I didn't notice these things, but as you look back now, you can say, oh, okay, that was a situation where something I should have noticed, should have known this was a bad thing. So I'm at work, and I get a call from my wife, who is at the hospital, and she's informing me that McKenna has air bubbles up into her, up in this region of her shoulder here, like little Rice Krispies underneath the skin. I immediately leave work, drive to the hospital, and we have the discussion with the doctor that no parent ever wants to have. And it's, we can make her stay, McKenna, we can make her stay here with us. We can put another chest tube in, we can do a couple of things, but we're only buying time for you. And Krista and I, again, made a terrible decision, a difficult decision, and the decision that I hope nobody ever has to make, but we had to decide that day to call the family, bring everybody down, and then that afternoon, give the doctors the directions to pull the plug on my daughter. And I live with that visual nightmare every single day of my life. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about it. McKenna was a very strong, brilliant, beautiful little girl. And there's a lot of us here from Minnesota, in the Minnesota chapter, 80 plus strong, that know McKenna, met McKenna, and are here because of McKenna. And I'm honored that they're all here, and a lot of us are wearing this shirt. But it's not the only way that this disease has affected me. In 1981, when I was in third grade, my brother was diagnosed with leukemia. And back then, there wasn't really a lot, as in today. They have all these new drugs, these new chemicals, there's new chemotherapies. Back then, they didn't have a lot of different things in the toolbox to utilize, and I lost my brother when he was 16 years old. In 2000, my grandmother was diagnosed with leukemia, and she passed away shortly after that diagnosis. And then, after that, McKenna was diagnosed, and it was thought that I could never have this happen to me, and then it happens to me 3 times in a row, 3 generations in a row. The nightmare that I live with, besides all of the treatment and all of the many, many nights and days that we spent in the hospital, is that we were, as a family, sitting around making supper one evening in our house, and my children, my older son Kale and my younger daughter Jaden, were joking about how it'll be one of their children who will have cancer. It follows the boys, and my son's like, no, it'll be my side, or so it'll be my child, and my daughter Jaden talking about, oh no, it'll be me. And I remember me and Krista looking at each other, just stunned, that our children are actually having this conversation, and that they're talking about who their child is going to have to deal with cancer and be diagnosed with this blood disease. And me and Krista at that time, I remember that evening after the kids went to bed, we talked and made a commitment to ourselves that we will be part of this organization as long as God-given gives us life on this planet, that we will do this. And we continue to fundraise, recruit. This year we've got a couple of friends who is a waitress at a local bar that we go to, and they're part owners, and we recruited them. We've got co-workers, we've got friends. We will continuously bring people into the TNT and who want to help and volunteer and do fundraising for us. In closing, I just wanted to say that I'm very honored that you are all here, that I was given this opportunity to come up and share a little bit about my daughter McKenna. But thank you, everyone, for traveling all across the country, fundraising, training. For us in Minnesota, running in February, it was cold outside. but I do want to thank you from my family and my children. Thank you very much for coming and doing this for us. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.